On the night they finally stepped out of the shadows and took him, Liu did not scream or run. He burst out of the stairwell of his old apartment building in Kaohsiung, shoes skidding on the concrete, eyes fixed on the yellow taxi idling at the curb. His whole body was pitched forward, like a man who had been holding his breath for days and could finally see the surface of the water. Then he saw the line of men between him and the car. They were waiting in a quiet, practiced formation. Plainclothes detectives, a few uniformed officers, faces flat, hands ready. For one suspended heartbeat, Liu froze. The hallway light behind him threw his shadow long across the pavement. Anyone watching might have expected the next moment to be a struggle. This frantic, strange taxi driver clawing to get past the police to reach his cab. Instead, Liu's knees simply gave out. He dropped onto the cold concrete as if someone had cut his strings, hands splayed, forehead nearly touching the ground. He began to sob, shoulders shaking, voice cracking open in a flood. "Thank you," he gasped in ragged Mandarin. "Thank you. Thank you. You came. You finally came." Detective Lin Xiaoji, who had orchestrated the ambush, looked down at the man they had been tailing for weeks. Liu clutched at the hem of his trousers as if he were grabbing onto a life raft. This was not how murder suspects usually reacted when the police closed in. Lin had planned for resistance, denial, maybe even violence. He had not expected gratitude. He hadn't expected the suspect to speak to the police as if they were rescuers. It would be a long time before Lin stopped hearing that first cracked "thank you" in his head, because by then he knew exactly what Liu believed they had rescued him from. And it was not prison. It was the thing Liu was convinced he had left upstairs in the dark, listening for his footsteps. 4 weeks earlier, on the morning of February 4th, 1991, the day still seemed ordinary enough. Taxi driver Wang leaned against the chipped counter inside the cab company's headquarters near Kaohsiung's busy airport, trading small talk with the dispatcher. Behind them, a wide glass window looked out over a fenced parking lot packed tight with yellow taxis. Engines idled, exhaust coughed into the cool air, and drivers clustered in little knots, smoking and negotiating fares with travelers, dragging suitcases. This was the nerve center of a city that lived on movement. A flight landed, a door slid open, and the parking lot breathed. Wang was halfway through a story about a rude passenger when the man behind the radio suddenly stopped listening. The dispatcher's eyes slid past Wang's face and fixed on something out in the lot. His mouth stayed parted around a word that never came. His hand, which had been drumming softly on the counter, went still. "Hey!" Wang laughed uneasily. "What? I grew a second head?" No response. The dispatcher just stared through him, pupils narrowing, as if he were watching a scene behind glass that Wang couldn't see. Then, without looking away, he lifted one hand and pointed over Wang's shoulder. The gesture was small, almost dazed. Wang turned. For a moment, he saw only what he always saw: rows of yellow taxis, drivers leaning on doors, a couple arguing about a fare, a child tugging at a mother's sleeve. Nothing unusual. Then he followed the line of the dispatcher's finger. And there, cutting across the cramped lot at a dead sprint, was Liu Shuang. Liu stood out that morning not only because he was running, full tilt, weaving between bumpers and shouting drivers, but because of what he carried. Cradled in both arms, as carefully as if it were a newborn child, was a gleaming golden statue of the Buddha. It caught the hard winter sunlight and threw it back, a bright, almost garish flare amid the exhaust haze. Wang watched, frowning. Liu was 35, tall, with a perpetually tight jaw and eyes that never quite settled on people for long. He was not the running type. He was the skulking around the edges type. Yet there he was now, charging across the asphalt, clutching the statue so tightly his knuckles were white. He reached his cab, yanked the driver's door open, and practically dove inside. From the window, Wang and the dispatcher saw the car rock as Liu slammed the door. His hands shot out, one after another, hammering the lock knobs down on every door, as if an invisible crowd were clawing at the handles. Then he went still. Inside the car, Liu's head turned wildly, scanning the lot. His eyes jumped from corner to corner, searching for someone or something. There was no one near his cab, no one chasing him. Just the same drivers, the same customers, the same noises of the airport. And yet Liu looked like a man who had outrun a pack of wolves. Wang stepped closer to the glass. After a minute, Liu's shoulders relaxed slightly. He sat back and carefully set the golden Buddha on the dashboard. Only then did Wang notice it wasn't alone. There were already 2, maybe 3 smaller statues up there, crowded together, facing the windshield like passengers. Liu bowed his head. From where they stood, Wang and the dispatcher couldn't hear him, but his lips moved steadily, forming silent words. His fingers trembled as he touched each statue in turn, as though checking to make sure they were still there, that they hadn't abandoned him. "Is he praying?" Wang murmured. "Looks like it," the dispatcher said. His voice was low, uneasy. They watched for another minute. Liu did not start the engine. He didn't reach for the radio. He just sat there behind the wheel, eyes closed, whispering to his little shrine. Eventually, the dispatcher exhaled and shook his head, as if coming out of a trance. "He's getting stranger," he muttered. Wang said nothing, but inside, something he had been trying to ignore for weeks clicked into place. Strange didn't begin to cover it. Liu had never been popular, even before the statues. He lived alone in a cramped apartment not far from the airport. He kept to himself at the taxi company, rarely joining the other drivers when they ate at the noodle stand across the street. If someone greeted him, he grunted. If someone tried to joke with him, he responded with a flat stare, as if humor were a foreign language. People wrote him off as antisocial, rude, the kind of coworker you learn to navigate around. But in recent months, something had shifted. Awkward had curdled into menacing. It started with how he talked about the neighborhood's stray cats and dogs. Most people found them mildly annoying when they knocked over trash cans or yowled at night, but they were part of the city's background noise, scrawny shapes slinking between bins and alleys, tolerated more than loved. Liu, however, seemed to take them personally. "They're filth," he snapped one day in the driver's room, when someone tossed a scrap of food to a limping alley dog. "They don't belong here. They're a disease." The other drivers shrugged it off. Everyone had their quirks, but Liu didn't drop it. He brought up the strays constantly, his words sharpening each time. Then one evening he arrived at the depot with a new purchase. "I bought a crossbow," he announced to a small cluster of colleagues who hadn't yet learned to avoid him. His eyes glittered, just a bit too bright. "A what?" Someone laughed weakly, thinking it was a joke. "A crossbow," Liu repeated. "At night, I go out. I shoot at the cats. The dogs, too." The room went quiet. One of the drivers coughed and muttered something about it being illegal or dangerous. Liu only smiled thinly and turned away as if the conversation bored him. From that night on, people watched their words around him. Some of them checked on their pets more often. Then came the fulu. One by one, strips of yellow parchment began to appear inside Liu's taxi, pasted carefully along the edges of the side windows and across the top of the windshield. Each strip was covered in brush-stroked characters and symbols, protective talismans, the kind often used in Taoist folk religion to ward off evil spirits. Combined with the growing army of Buddha statues on his dashboard, the cab began to look less like a vehicle and more like a small, rolling shrine. From the outside, it was unnerving. When Wang walked past Liu's car one night, he paused, staring. There were so many talismans taped to the glass that the view out the windows was nearly gone. The world outside was broken into narrow, yellow-framed slits. "How can he even see to drive?" Wang muttered. That was the thing. Somehow Liu still did. He still picked up fares, still logged his hours. He just did it behind a wall of paper prayers, flanked on all sides by staring, golden faces. Everyone at the company saw this. Everyone talked about it in low voices. No one confronted him. They had all seen the line where eccentricity blurred into danger. Nobody wanted to be the one standing in front of him when he crossed it. And yet, on that February morning, as Liu tore across the parking lot with a new golden Buddha in his arms, even the men who had been studiously looking the other way felt that internal line tremble. Wang and the dispatcher exchanged a look that said the same thing. "This isn't normal anymore. We should tell someone," the dispatcher said quietly. "I'll call the police," Wang answered. He stepped away from the window, mind already reaching for the number of a friend he knew in the department. Behind him, the dispatcher kept his eyes on the cab in the lot. By the time Wang came back with the phone in his hand, Liu's taxi was no longer there. It had peeled out of the lot so fast that other drivers were still cursing at the screech of his tires. "He almost took off someone's door," one of them said later. "He was driving like a man with death, grabbing the back of his shirt." The next day, Wang got through to his friend in the police. He described the scene. Liu sprinting, the compulsive prayers, the talismans crowding the glass, the reckless way he had torn out of the lot. He kept his voice polite but urgent. This wasn't a complaint. It was a warning. On the other end of the line, his friend was quiet for several seconds. "Wang," he said finally, "we already know about Liu." "How?" Wang asked, surprised. "Because he was a suspect," the officer said. "In the Japanese girl's case. The one from last April. The student who vanished." The name came back to Wang by the time the call ended. Mariko. Mariko Iguchi, 23 years old, a university student from Japan. Her missing person poster had been on television, in the papers, in the small plastic frames at the corner store counters. A smiling face with dark hair, a tourist backpack. A caption explaining that she had come to Taiwan alone on vacation, and somewhere between airport and hostel, she had vanished. In 1990, Taiwan's economy leaned heavily on visitors like her. Japanese tourists filled the planes, the hotels, the night markets, bringing money and a sense of connection to the wider world. The government's campaigns had been very clear. Taiwan is safe. Taiwan is welcoming. Send your children here. Let them see another country before adulthood locks them down. When Mariko's parents had waved her off at the airport, they'd been anxious, of course. No parent is ever truly calm when their child boards a plane alone. But there were brochures, statistics, glowing stories. They had convinced themselves that danger was for other places. Mariko landed on April 2nd. She checked into a youth hostel in Taipei, sent postcards home, took photographs in front of temples and neon-lit streets. She had always been independent, her friend said, the kind of woman who would rather figure out a subway map than ask someone to guide her through it. A few days later, the postcard stopped. The calls stopped. She did not board her return flight. At first, the investigation had followed the most obvious path: the taxi drivers who had seen her last. It was an open secret then, a cultural oddity that foreigners found both charming and strange. Some Taiwanese cab drivers would open their homes to long-distance fares, offering a room instead of sending them to a hotel. "Why pay for a room?" they'd say. "You're already paying me. Stay with my family. Eat with us. We'll show you the real city." Mariko had done just that. The first driver the police questioned admitted that he had taken her sightseeing and let her stay with his family for a few nights, but insisted that she had left afterward, healthy and cheerful. He had no idea where she had gone next. They checked the postmarks on her last postcard. It was dated after she left his house. He was ruled out. For a time, the case cooled. Other tips dried up. The police searched hostels, hotels, train stations. They sent faxes to the Japanese consulate, the students' university, anyone who might know of her habits. Then they offered a reward. Money has a way of turning shadows into possible witnesses. Calls poured in. Someone had seen her on a bus on a beach in a distant city. Someone claimed she'd run away with a lover. Someone swore she'd been spotted crossing into the mountains with a strange man. Most of it was smoke. But one of the tips was different. A train station employee said he had seen a young Japanese woman, matching Mariko's description, speaking to a Kaohsiung taxi driver shortly before she vanished. The driver's name on the report: Liu Shuang. When they pulled him in for questioning, Liu did not deny it. He admitted to giving Mariko a ride. Just one ride, he insisted, from the station into town. She had paid, thanked him, and stepped out. He had not seen her again. They pressed him for details. Where exactly did she ask to go? Did she talk about her plans? Who was she meeting? Did she have another cab waiting? He answered those questions with the same small pool of details, repeating them until the words went flat. If he was lying, it was buried under a dead man's patience. And then the tips became an avalanche: half-truths, inventions, attempts to angle for the reward. The detectives were buried under people's greed and confusion. Liu slipped backward from the front of their minds into a folder marked uncertain. They never officially cleared him. They never officially charged him. The case hovered in a limbo that kept the public uneasy. The stories spread beyond Taiwan, carried by news wires and television. A foreign student vanishing in a country that prided itself on safety is the kind of wound that doesn't heal quietly. And as more eyes turned to the case, something else began to happen. People in Kaohsiung and beyond reported receiving strange phone calls. A woman's voice was on the other end, speaking urgent, jagged Japanese, too fast to understand for those who barely knew the language, sobbing or breathless, and then abruptly cutting off. There were reports of Mariko's name being heard in the street, of glimpses of a young woman who looked like her on trains and platforms. None of it held up under scrutiny. There were no tapes, no photographs that proved anything. It was just a feeling that the city itself was being whispered to by someone who no longer had a body. When Wang's report reached the department in early 1991, the Mariko case was still open. The detective in charge of that file was Lin Xiaoji, a man whose posture always looked like it had just come up from bending over a desk. Years of paperwork and interviews had carved careful lines around his eyes. When he heard Liu's name attached to a fresh report, erratic driving, obsessive religious paraphernalia, paranoia, he felt the old case stir like something in cold storage suddenly remembering it once had a pulse. He could not ignore it. "Don't approach him yet," Lin told his team. "Watch him, quietly. If he's connected to her, he'll lead us somewhere he shouldn't. They started trailing Liu later that month, in the middle of February. Following a taxi driver required patience and distance. They rotated plain sedans, kept their lights off, always stayed a few cars behind in traffic. They learned Liu's rhythms quickly. He worked. That was the first surprise. For all the clutter inside his cab, all the talismans and statues and whispers, he still picked up fares the way any other driver did. He cruised train stations, airport exits, hotel fronts. People slid into his back seat, oblivious to the yellow paper and golden faces framing them, named a destination and paid at the end. From the outside, it was almost mundane. What was not mundane were the hours in between. Liu almost never went home. He would pass his apartment building, slow slightly, then keep driving. When he finally did park, it was usually in whatever lot was nearest. Behind a night market, near a shuttered storefront, pressed into the line of taxis by the airport fence. Detectives watched him eat from styrofoam containers in the driver's seat. They watched him close his eyes there, slumping against the headrest, waking with a jerk at every loud sound. They watched him rearrange the Buddha statues endlessly, fingertips brushing their smooth surfaces as if checking for warmth. It was like watching a man who considered his car not a tool, but a sanctuary, and his apartment an enemy territory. The few times he did go up to his apartment, the detectives took careful note. The pattern never changed. First, Liu would park at the curb, engine still clicking as it cooled. He would sit for a moment, eyes darting in all directions, scanning the sidewalks, the neighboring balconies, the staircase leading up past the first floor. His breathing visibly quickened. His hand hovered over the door handle. Then, like a sprinter waiting for a starting gun, he would thrust the door open and bolt. He ran into the building as if chased. His body pitched forward, barely under control, keys clutched in his fist. The door slammed behind him. From the street, all the detectives could see were the flickers of shadow behind the frosted glass of the stairwell. 2 minutes, sometimes 3. Then the sound of feet again, heavier now, almost panicked, coming down, skipping steps. The building's door burst open, and Liu came shooting out into the light. He never slowed until he was inside the cab with the door slammed. Locks punched down in quick succession. His chest rose and fell as he grabbed one of the golden statues like a child grabbing a nightlight. Sometimes the detectives could see his lips moving. Sometimes he rubbed the fulu on the glass with his fingertips, smoothing out imaginary wrinkles, whispering to the ink. Once, Detective Lin scribbled in his notebook, "Fear, pattern consistent. Not of police, of interior. If this man had killed Mariko, if she had left some trace, a grave, a hidden room, a blood stain, then his avoidance of his own apartment made an unsettling kind of sense." But as the weeks went on, Lin began to wonder if what they were seeing wasn't guilt exactly, but something closer to terror. Not the fear of being caught, the fear of something already inside. On March 4th, 1991, Lin decided observation had reached its limits. "If we keep watching him from outside that building," he told his team, "eventually we're only going to see him run one way and not return. If he's involved in this, we need to talk to him before that happens." He chose the apartment as the ambush point because that was where Liu was weakest. On the street, behind the wheel, Liu still had some illusion of control, pedals under his feet, the open road as escape. On the stairs between the dark of his apartment and the relative safety of his cab, he was stripped down to reflex and panic. They waited until Liu's routine drove him back there. That evening, the surveillance team called in. Liu had parked in his usual spot by the curb, sat sweating behind the wheel for a full minute, then bolted into the building. "He's inside now," the voice on the radio said. Probably bathroom. You better move. Lin and two other officers were already in the car. They pulled up without sirens, sliding in quietly behind Liu's taxi. Uniformed officers who had been waiting out of sight joined them, forming a loose ring near the entrance. The air outside was cool. A line of laundry snapped gently on a balcony above. Somewhere, a television played a variety show laugh track too loud. Lin's heart thumped in his ears. He might run, he thought. He might fight. He might confess. Or he might say nothing at all. He looked at the taxi, its windows taped over with fulu, the outline of the Buddha statues on the dashboard visible as dark shapes. He thought of the missing Japanese student, of her parents watching news reports from another country, of postcards that ended mid-journey. Then the stairwell door slammed open. Liu came hurtling out, body tilted forward, momentum carrying him down the last few steps. The moment he registered the circle of officers, he flinched as if he had crashed into glass. For an instant, Lin saw the wild animal reflex, eyes calculating distance, exits the direction of the curb. Then something else slid over Liu's face. His expression crumpled. He dropped. He literally fell to his knees in front of the nearest uniformed officer, hands shaking, tears already spilling. "Thank you," he choked. "You're here. You're finally here. Please, don't leave me." The officer glanced at Lin, unsettled. Lin stepped forward. "Mr. Liu," he said, keeping his voice calm, "we need to speak with you at the station. About a case." "Yes," Liu said immediately, nodding so hard his teeth clicked. "Yes. Take me. Please. Please." He did not ask what case. He did not ask if he was under arrest. He looked, Lin thought later, like a man being escorted out of a burning building. At the station, Liu seemed almost reluctant to leave the car. Not his own taxi. He hadn't looked back at that once. The police car. He lingered beside it, as if he would have preferred to climb into the trunk, curl up there among the spare tire and metal, and never step foot inside the building again. "You'll be safe here," Lin said, not because he believed in ghosts, but because it was clear what language Liu was currently fluent in. "Safe," Liu repeated softly, as if it were an unfamiliar word he wanted to keep tasting. Inside, fluorescence flattened everything. The station's corridors smelled of paper, stale coffee, and the faint metallic tang of old cigarettes clinging to paint. Other officers glanced up as the small procession passed. Liu bowed his head at each one, murmuring, "Thank you, thank you," as though walking through a temple and paying respect to statues of lesser gods. Lin led him into a small interview room. Table, 2 chairs, a recording device. He gestured. "Sit." Liu sat obediently. His hands lay flat on the tabletop, fingers splayed as if showing he carried no weapons. "Would you like some water?" Lin asked. Liu shook his head, eyes darting to the corners of the room, the ceiling, the door, as if checking for cracks where something might slip through. "We're going to talk," Lin said. "About you, about your work, and about a young woman named Mariko Iguchi." At the sound of the name, Liu's gaze snapped to him. For a heartbeat, his expression became utterly blank. Then his shoulders hunched, as if someone had laid a weight across the back of his neck. "I know why you think I'm here," he said. His voice had dropped to a hoarse whisper. "Because of her." "Yes," Lin said. "Because she is still missing. And because people saw you with her." "I didn't kill her," Liu said quickly. "I would never—" He trailed off. The denial hung there, thin and brittle. Lin did not press immediately. Instead, he asked about the taxi work, the Buddha statues, the fulu. Why sleep in the car? Why run in and out of the apartment as if something were waiting there? I live in the cab now, Liu said simply, as if it were obvious. It's safer. Safer than your home? Inside the apartment, Liu said, and his hands contracted slightly, nails scraping the tabletop. She's there. Who? He lifted his eyes. There was nowhere left to dodge. Her, he whispered. Mariko. For a moment, Lin said nothing. On the tape, there would be the faint whir of the recorder, the low hum of building ventilation. She's in your apartment, Lin repeated evenly. You expect me to believe that the missing Japanese student is hiding in your flat? Not hiding, Liu said. Haunting. He said the word with the rigidity of someone forcing himself not to stutter. You think her ghost is there, Lin translated. Liu nodded. He looked strangely relieved that someone had said it plainly. She breathes, he added, voice shaking. She asks why. Always why. Outside, while Lin coaxed fragments of this story from Liu, other officers were already on their way to his apartment with a warrant. If Mariko was there, alive, injured, imprisoned, or dead, they would find something. They found nothing. The apartment was small and sparse, a mattress on a low frame, a table, an old television, a narrow bathroom with a cracked mirror. No second toothbrush, no extra shoes, no clothing that didn't fit a thin, solitary man. No signs of a struggle. No blood. No broken locks or forced windows. It was, in the words of one of the officers, ordinary in a way that feels wrong once you know how strange he is outside. They returned to the station with this information. Lin listened, jaw tightening. If there was no intruder, no squatters, no secret roommate, then Liu's story of being haunted inside the apartment was either a delusion, a lie to deflect suspicion, or something in between, a guilt that had grown teeth in his mind. For 4 days they questioned him. They did not scream at him or beat him, but they did not let him escape the circle of his own words. They brought him back again and again to the same points. You say she's there. No one else saw her. You say she breathes. You say she asks why. Why what exactly? On the 4th day, something in Liu cracked. He began not with the crime, but with the sound. The first time, he said, staring down at his hands, was the night after I buried her. Lin did not interrupt. Liu's voice grew distant, the way voices do when the speaker steps back into a memory they've been walking in alone for too long. I came home late, he said. My hands still smelled like dirt. It was under my nails in the lines of my palms. I washed them until the water ran gray. I changed my clothes. I put everything in a bag. I told myself it was done. After that, I could just live. Just forget. He swallowed. The apartment was quiet. I turned off the light and lay down. I closed my eyes. For a while, I almost believed it had worked. Then, he paused, listening to something only he could hear. Then I heard breathing. There is a particular kind of breathing that belongs in a home. Your own, a partner's, a child's, even a pet's restless shifting. We can tell without seeing who is sharing the dark with us. According to Liu, this was not any of those. It was from the far room, he said. The one I had emptied that day. It was too steady, too deliberate. Not sleep, not panic. Just there. He lay still, he said, convincing himself it was the building itself. Old pipes, wind, somebody upstairs, thin walls. The breathing continued, and he got up, turned on the light, and went to the doorway. No one, he said. Nothing. Just the room. But the air smelled wrong. Like when you open a freezer and forget what you put inside. He shut the door and went back to bed. The next night, it was closer. He tried to ignore it. He turned up the television until the sound of canned laughter and game show music drowned out the slow inhale-exhale rhythm that was no longer coming from any single corner, but from the apartment itself. He began sleeping in his taxi some nights, telling himself it was because the parking lot was closer to work, because he could grab fares early. Then the breathing followed him into his dreams. It wasn't just sound anymore, he said. It was a presence, watching, waiting, asking without words. Why? Lin let the silence grow heavier. Why what? He asked finally. Liu's lips moved soundlessly before he forced the answer out. Why I did it, he whispered. Why I killed her. The word hovered between them. Start there, Lin said quietly. Tell me. Liu closed his eyes as if bracing for impact that would not come from the detective's hand but from his own memory. He had seen Mariko for the first time in the spring haze of April 1990, standing by herself on the platform of a Taiwanese train station, her luggage at her feet. She wore her backpack straps snug against her shoulders, both hands resting on the handle of her suitcase. The backpack had a charm dangling from the zipper, a small, cartoonish animal from some Japanese shop. Her hair was pulled back in a simple tie. She looked like what she was, a young student from abroad, more curious than afraid, standing in a country that had promised her parents it would take good care of her. She waved, Liu said. I pulled over. I opened the door. She smiled and bowed a little before getting in. I asked where she was from. She said, Tokyo. She was here to see Taiwan before graduation. He drove her into the city, pointing out landmarks in broken Japanese and Mandarin, supplemented with gestures. She laughed at his mistakes, corrected him gently when he mispronounced a word. He took her to the night market, to a hillside temple, with a view over the harbor. She took photographs, the temple gate, the food stalls, a selfie with the taxi's yellow hood behind her. At some point, he offered what so many drivers did then. You can stay at my place, he told her, hands loose on the wheel. Cheaper than a hotel. Safe. I know the city. It was a practice pitch, part hospitality, part self-interest. Fares who stayed with you were less likely to shop around for other cabs. They trusted you. They returned. She hesitated only a moment, calculating perhaps the cost of a hotel, the shortness of her stay, the friendliness of this man who had shown her temples and markets without trying to charge extra. She said yes. Liu's apartment was not large, but he cleared one of the rooms for her. Fresh sheets, a spare pillow, the faint smell of cleaning products hastily applied. He cooked simple meals, rice, vegetables, fish, and she thanked him in halting Mandarin, laughing when she mixed up phrases. They moved around each other like two satellites in a shared orbit, close but not colliding, for a while. On the night that would later fracture into 100 slow-motion frames in Liu's memory, the air in the apartment was heavy. I don't know what made me say it, he told Lin. Maybe it was how she smiled. Maybe it was how alone I felt in my own country. How I thought, here is someone who doesn't know me. I can be different for her. Better? He had poured rice into 2 bowls. She sat at the table, chopsticks poised. The television murmured in the background with a variety show laugh track. You're very kind, she said politely. Thank you for letting me stay. It's nothing, he said. A guest brings luck. He watched her as she ate. The words were in his mouth long before he acknowledged them. "You're very beautiful," he said. She looked up, startled, then smiled nervously, the way people do when they are trying not to offend someone who has just crossed the thin line between courtesy and something else. "Thank you," she said again, softer this time. "I like you," he said. "Maybe we could be more. Not just driver and guest." He did not describe his words in detail to Lynn later. Perhaps he had romanticized them in his mind, dressing them in softer fabric. Perhaps they came out clumsy and demanding from the start. What he did describe clearly was her answer. She shook her head, he said. She said, "No, I'm sorry. I don't feel that way." Not cruelly, not mockingly, just firm. She added perhaps that she was here to travel, to see the country, not to start something serious with a man she barely knew. Perhaps she said she was tired, that she wanted to sleep. He nodded. He forced a smile, said he understood. But inside, something knotted. He lay awake in his own room that night, listening to the soft creaks of the apartment settling, the distant hiss of traffic. On the other side of the wall, he heard her moving around, opening and closing drawers. Then the quiet thump of her suitcase lid. Then, eventually, the slow, even breathing of someone who has sunk into deep sleep in a foreign country, trusting that the roof above her will not betray her. Liu stared at the ceiling. The rejection crawled over his skin. In the version of himself he had started to believe in, the one that could be new to her, worthy of her attention, he had not planned for a no. He had not planned for the world to stay the same, for him to remain the awkward man his colleagues avoided. While she went back to Japan with a few photographs and perhaps a brief, kind memory of the driver who'd been nice but strange. Then another thought slipped in, as dark as the space under the bed. If she left, if she went back, she could talk about staying with him, about his habits, about anything she'd noticed that might sound odd if retold in the right tone. He imagined her friends' faces. He imagined laughter, pity. He imagined being reduced again to a story other people told. In the early hours of the morning, he got up. He did not use her name when he finally described what happened next to Lynn. He spoke instead of actions. Strung together, like beads slid along a cord with shaking fingers. He went to the closet. He took down the crossbow he had bought for stray animals. He loaded it. He walked down the short hall to the room where she slept. He opened the door. He stepped inside. "She didn't wake up at first," he said, voice so low the recorder barely caught it. "It was quiet. I could have left, but I didn't." He raised the crossbow. "I shot her," he whispered. "Once. Twice. Again." He did not describe the sounds. He did not say whether she screamed, whether she saw him, whether there was a moment of recognition in her eyes. He skipped past the contact as if even in confession he could not bear to reassemble those seconds fully. Afterwards, he said, "I thought, it's done. It had to be done. I just needed to make sure no one ever found her." What came after was methodical, in the way that guilty people often are. He wrapped her body. He waited for the dark to deepen. He carried the terrible weight down the stairs, out past sleeping neighbors who would never know just how close grief had passed to their own doors. He drove to a place he had already chosen. He dug, he buried, he went home and scrubbed. He told himself the world would cover what he had done, the way soil covers bone. And for a few hours it almost seemed as if it would, until he lay down in his bed and started to hear breathing from the other room. "The first time I saw her," Liu said, "I thought I was dreaming." He had, over the weeks since the crime, started living more and more out of his cab. Some nights, worn down by exhaustion and fear, he forced himself to brave the apartment again. Those were the nights when the breathing was loudest, when it seemed to sync with his own heartbeat. On one of those nights, he told Lynn, he returned to his apartment as quickly as ever, bolt from the car, sprint up the stairs, door slammed and locked behind him. The room was dark. He could hear his own ragged inhalations as he crossed to the bathroom. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor, as if that alone could prevent something from appearing in his peripheral vision. After he finished in the bathroom, he opened the door. The breathing had stopped, he said. It was worse. Silence can be louder than sound when you have the sense of someone holding their breath in the same room. He took a step into the hallway. That was when he heard the voice. It was rough, he said, like someone who had been screaming for hours. A woman's voice. She said, "Why?" Just that, again and again. He turned. In the story he told to the detective, there was no slow reveal, no careful, cinematic glimpse. There was simply this. She was there in the hallway, he said. Her hair hung down. It was tangled, wet. I couldn't see her face, or I didn't want to. She didn't walk. She moved, fast, at me, like something pulled. He bolted for the front door. His hands fumbled at the lock, slippery with sweat. He could feel her close behind him, the word "why" tearing out of her throat, flat and accusing. He got the door open and stumbled through. He slammed it behind him just as something hit it from the other side with a dull, heavy thud. Then, silence again. That was the moment, he said, when he stopped thinking of her as a person he had killed and started thinking of her as something else, something that had stepped out of the space he had tried to create between his actions and their consequences. He slept in his taxi after that. He bought more statues, more fulu. He rubbed the ink until it smudged. He whispered prayers that no longer had coherent words. He drove. He picked up strangers and dropped them off, all while carrying his own secret in the trunk of his mind. He began to believe that as long as he did not step over the threshold of his apartment for more than a few minutes at a time, she could not reach him fully. It was a fragile superstition. His life shrank to the interior of his vehicle and the few meters of sidewalk between car and building. By the time the police surrounded him on March 4th, he had not slept properly in months. His sanity frayed at the edges. His world had narrowed to fear, prayer, and the constant anticipation of that raw voice behind him. When he saw the officers in front of his building, blocking the path back to the taxi, he believed, with the fervor of a drowning man seeing a boat, that they were not there to drag him into court. They were there to stand between him and the thing upstairs. After Liu's confession, the rest was the kind of work detectives are trained for, not haunted by, at least in theory. He told them where he had buried her. At night, under the same sky that had watched him hide his crime months before, officers dug where he directed them. Shovel blades cut into earth that had settled over the winter. The smell of turned soil rose up, damp and cool. They found her. Not all of her. The remains in the ground were badly decomposed, but identification was possible. Age, size, the personal effects that remained, enough to tell them this was Mariko. But when they counted, when they checked and rechecked, one fact stood out stark and obscene. The body in the dirt ended at the waist. Her lower half had been buried there. Her upper half, her torso, her arms, and most importantly, her head, was missing. Liu insisted he had buried everything in one place. The earth said otherwise. They expanded the search area. They combed nearby ground, drainage ditches, any place an animal might have dragged bone. Nothing. It was as if the top half of her body had never existed, or as if it had walked away. Even the most rational investigators felt something tighten in their chests at that discrepancy. It was one thing to dismiss a haunted man's talk of breathing and voices. It was another to stand in a field holding only the lower half of a person he admitted to dismembering and have no plausible explanation for where the rest of her had gone. In the end, the court did not need the missing head to convict him. His confession, the physical remains, the corroborating details of Mariko's trip and disappearance, they were enough. He was found guilty of murder and sentenced to prison. He is still there. Outside the courtroom, however, the story did not end neatly. People in Taiwan had already watched the case unfold in the press for months before Liu's arrest. They had followed the anxious pleas from Japan, the reward announcements, the rumors. Many of them had received late-night phone calls in the past year, real or imaginary, from a weeping woman speaking Japanese before abruptly hanging up. For those people, the revelation of what Liu had done to his guest did not erase the eerie months between her disappearance and his confession. If anything, it rearranged them. The calls had started after she vanished. They had intensified as the case gained more attention. They had reached a fever pitch around the time Liu's own life began to unravel under the weight of the breath in his apartment. It was tempting for a lot of people to stitch those threads together. They said Mariko's spirit had refused to accept being reduced to a line in a file. They said she had called anyone whose ears could still hear her, keeping the world's attention pinned to Taiwan long enough for the detectives to circle back to the man who had last driven her away from a station platform. They said that when Liu spoke of a head chasing him down the hallway, hair covering its face, screaming "why" with a torn throat, he wasn't describing a hallucination. He was describing a woman whose body had been broken, but whose outrage hadn't. Even some of the police found themselves repeating these whispers, half ironically at first, then with a creeping seriousness. Detective Lin himself, the man who had tried hardest to keep his feet on solid ground, developed his own story he only sometimes shared. He said that once, while he was in Liu's empty apartment after the arrest, checking for anything they might have missed, he felt a hand press firmly between his shoulder blades. It was not a brush of air. It was not the settling of an old building. It was a push, clear enough that he stumbled forward a step and turned around, expecting to see a colleague behind him. There was no one there. He never wrote that in any official report. But when asked years later if he believed that something beyond ordinary police work had helped resolve the case, he did not immediately say no. Instead, he would look away for a moment as if listening to something only he could hear and say, "Sometimes a victim leaves more evidence than we know how to measure." In Kaohsiung's taxi lots, drivers still hang small charms from their mirrors, tape fulu strips above their windshields, set Buddha statues on their dashboards. Some do it out of habit. Some do it out of faith. Some do it because they heard once about a colleague who filled his cab with such protections and still couldn't keep one relentless question from following him home at night. Why? The city has long since buried the case under new headlines, new worries. But in the quiet hours, when the phones ring unexpectedly and the line goes dead before anyone speaks, or when a driver glances in his rearview mirror and for a split second thinks he sees someone sitting behind him who isn't there, it is not hard to imagine a young woman with a suitcase standing on a platform asking the world to remember her. Justice, in the end, was tangible. A man in prison, a family with answers, a grave where there had only been a question. But the residue remains in the missing half of a body and the echo of a hoarse voice in an empty hallway. A reminder that some stories do not end when the judge's gavel falls. They end when the people who were wronged finally stop asking why. This was Midnight Horror Society, dark curiosity for sleep. Until your next midnight session, sleep well.